This is a class about microdosing psilocybin mushrooms. We are not talking about lion's mane or reishi or chaga mushrooms, although I love all of those medicinal mushrooms that have gotten really popular. We are talking about psilocybin mushrooms. We are talking about magic mushrooms tonight, but taken in teeny tiny doses. About a tenth of the dose that you maybe took in college. My name is Rihanna Batiste. People call me Rye because it tends to be easier. Rye like the whiskey or the bread, ironically, neither of which I eat or drink, but still it helps people to remember. I'm a Duke trained, Duke certified, board certified integrative health coach. What does that mean? It just means that I trained at Duke Integrative Medicine in the art and science of coaching, of supporting someone one-on-one and in small groups to changing their habits and shifting their mindset. Neuroplasticity, shifting the brain and how we show up. The most exciting work that's come out of the neuroscience field in the last 20 years is the fact that we can change our brains. Previously, we thought you're born and then your brain develops for like the first 18 to 21 years. And then once your prefrontal cortex is in place, you're good and that's who you are. Incorrect. We now know and we can be empowered by the fact that we can change profoundly and without that much difficulty. So my interest in health coaching was based on my interest in changing myself and healing my body and changing my mind about how I saw things, the negative thought patterns that I saw myself stuck in. I was so empowered by this idea that we can change our brains that I started partnering with people to do just that about 7 years ago. I've had an incredibly rewarding experience coaching. My field is focused around self-nourishment and the kitchen and food, but as any one of you could probably agree, food stuff is never just about food. Yes, sometimes there's a learning deficit. Sometimes we don't really know what's good for us, right? There's a lot of confusion in the nutrition world. I don't do a whole lot of eat this and not that, except for where it comes to fake food and real food. What I really do is support people to getting in higher integrity with how they want to be eating. Most people know what they want to be doing. It's the part where you actually do it that's so difficult. My interest in microdosing came when I started to really hit some walls with some clients and in my own progress with myself. And while the work of coaching and mantras and meditation and all these incredible tools that we have to change our brains is real, the plant medicines that are available to us to help us really repattern is amazing. A friend gifted me some mushroom powder. We will talk about how to create the microdoses tonight. I'm going to share everything I know. I'm spilling the beans tonight. I'm not withholding anything. A friend shared some powder with me about 3 years ago, and I started low and went slow, which is my encouragement for anybody dabbling in microdosing or using psychedelics and plant medicine. Start low and go slow. And I slowly started to experience what it felt like to get out of my own way. Just shift this thing. I can't stop being mad at this person, right? Or I can't stop ruminating on that thing. We have well-worn neural pathways, you guys, that it's not your fault that you're stuck. And microdosing and plant medicine can support you in forging new neural pathways quickly. Microdosing psilocybin mushrooms. Right here, right off the bat, I'm putting a picture of Psilocybin cubensis. This is the strain of mushroom that I'm talking about tonight. I'm not talking about LSD. I'm not talking about ayahuasca. And you can microdose all sorts of psychedelics. I am only talking about Psilocybin cubensis. The cubensis strain of mushroom, there are over 200 varieties of this mushroom. Most notably is a strain called Golden Teachers. A lot of people hear of that strain, considered sort of one of the best. But really any of those strains look similar to this, also called penis envy for obvious reasons. So I'm showing you a picture of the actual mushroom that we're talking about tonight. Currently in the United States, selling and buying this mushroom is considered illegal, although there is major amounts of decriminalization happening. Colorado, I think it was New Hampshire recently, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. We're seeing a massive movement towards legalizing this plant simply because of its extraordinary compounds, because of the research that's being done. I'll talk more about that, and the capacity this plant has to not just deal with symptoms, but be a cure for depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders. The list goes on and on and on and on. So this is your brain on psilocybins. Has anybody seen this image before? This actually came out of a study, I believe, at the Imperial College of London, where they have a psychedelic center of research. And what you're seeing on the left is the placebo effect, someone who believes that they got psilocybin mushrooms, and you're seeing the network connections in the brain, the parts of the brain that are connected. On the right, you are seeing the psilocybin brain. I mean, I don't have to say much to point out that what's happening is extraordinary. You see brand new network connections happening in the brain across different regions of the brain. This explains why in a psychedelic experience, you're having sights and sounds and memories, and then a song from 6th grade comes into the picture, right? And then all of a sudden this memory that you thought you'd forgotten pops up. This is what psychedelics do. They mimic serotonin, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they connect our brain in numerous and profound ways. This is what makes it appealing for people from a creativity standpoint. This is where we talk about getting into a flow state by using psychedelics because of this effect that it has on the brain. Now, this study is on a large dose of psilocybins, guys, but there are not many studies on microdosing. Is it safe? Is this safe? Well, everybody probably knows the story of somebody who used LSD or mushrooms and jumped in a river, jumped off a cliff, jumped off a bridge. Those are the stories I heard as a kid. And I don't want to downplay that psychedelics can be dangerous when used irresponsibly. Certainly, lives have been lost that way. But if we're talking about whether it's safe to ingest this substance, I was not able to find evidence of many deaths or sickness from psilocybin mushrooms. So they are considered very safe, even by the US government that has given permission to Johns Hopkins University to be studying them in their psychedelic center. We're gonna see this stuff in orange pill bottles pretty soon. By comparison, anywhere from 100 to 500 people a year die from Tylenol. So I say that to just draw the comparison that yes, it is safe to use psychedelics, and the research is consistently supporting this. You certainly want to be very intentional about how you use this medicine to be safe. So I've just outlined 3. The first one is MAPS, if you've not heard of this, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. MAPS has been around since the 80s. They're a nonprofit, and they develop an incredible amount of research just from their nonprofit efforts. They're also working on normalizing and legalizing all psychedelics. They include cannabis in this. They're studying major depressive disorder right now, psychedelics for cancer patients, psychedelics for OCD, and quitting smoking. Amazing correlation, psychedelics and addiction. That goes for smoking, that goes for drinking, and that can even go for something like sugar. Sugar addiction is real. Johns Hopkins, this is huge, you guys. There's a Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research in this country right now. Highly funded, very active center. Their studies are even more impressive than what MAPS is doing. Alzheimer's, PTSD, resistant Lyme's disease. I mean, the implications here for people with chronic illness are unbelievable. Certainly people dealing with end of life. There's incredible research backing that up. Anorexia, alcohol use, depression, anxiety. I don't want to just go on and read the slides, but you can see here that this is not something that's just, people who kind of like to dabble in drugs have found that there's some benefits. We are really recognizing on a very high and intellectual level the healing properties of these plants. It's very exciting time to be alive and to be using and sharing and learning about plant medicine. Okay, so how does it work? How do psychedelics work in the brain? Well, we saw all those network connections that were formed, right? What we also know is that psychedelics mimic serotonin, right? We all know what serotonin is. It's one of the most important chemicals that we experience as human. It drives a lot of our behavior. We could take the psilocybin, LSD is also included in this, although I'm not talking about LSD tonight. And what it does is it stimulates a serotonin receptor called 5-HT2A. This receptor is mostly on our brain, but we also have receptor sites in our joints, in our heart, and our stomach. It's really pretty cool stuff when you read about that. The 5-HT2A then stimulates brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I have to write that down, BDNF. And it also stimulates glutamate. When those two things are stimulated, the BDNF and the glutamate, that's when creativity starts, new perspectives, brain starts to shift, that feeling of oneness and well-being and presence. If you've ever used psychedelics, that happens. And then the infamous ego dissolution or ego death that can happen with larger doses or over a long time. You'll not see a lot of ego death happening with microdosing, although certainly we can talk about being intentional if that is your intention. But that ego death piece really is that getting out of your own way part that I was talking about earlier. It stimulates the parts of the brain that deal with memory, cognition, and learning, which when I talked about that, all of a sudden a song from 6th grade comes on, my first couple of times microdosing, I just kept feeling like, so weird. I'm like noticing things and then having memories and making these really interesting connections. And it wasn't until I found that picture of the network connections that I was like, I'm not crazy. I really am triggering all these old forgotten parts of my brain and piecing things together in a new way. It's like really when you first start meditating, right? When you really just start first understanding consciousness, that moment of like, oh, I'm seeing myself do this thing and I'm not attached to me doing this thing. And I'm curious about why I do that thing. And I you know what? I don't want to do that thing anymore. I think I'll change that thing. There's just an easier time seeing what's not working and then making intentional choices to shift it when you use psychedelics, even in microdoses. So why would you want to microdose? Why do people microdose? Why are we hearing about this so much, right? There's books, there's podcasts, there's countless blog posts about it. It's really everywhere in the culture right now. Gosh, I just keep admitting people are up to 34. So why do we want to microdose? Lots of reasons. To change any habits that aren't working for you, a way that you just keep showing up, a food that you just keep eating, right? That goes down in the addiction category there. Or just kind of like, I don't know, with me, snapping at my 12-year-old, right? The way that I get triggered and then the aggressive, like just like my dad way that I show up with him. That's a habit, that's a neural pathway that I can intentionally shift with microdosing over time. You can treat a specific condition, PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, any women who struggle with that. I meant to include some testimonials tonight. I don't have the exact quotes, but I've worked with 2 different women with PMDD who within the first month of microdosing, for the first time in decades, for both of them, did not have a suicidal thought in the week before their cycle began. If you've struggled with suicidal thoughts, if you have PMD, if you understand this condition, you know how massive that is. These are women who do not want to kill themselves, who, when the hormone surge starts before their cycle, have invasive suicidal thoughts that they cannot control. Microdosing is incredible at addressing PMDD, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. All of these mood disorders that are plaguing us as a culture, really, we have cures for them here with plants. Microdosing can facilitate a deeper spiritual connection and a creative flow state. I took my microdose today and then I waited about 40 minutes, which for me on an empty stomach is about when the dose would kick in. It's subtle. And then I set my timer for 15 minutes and I meditated. The ease with which I was able to access the present moment and stay in the meditation, even when my 12-year-old came in and interrupted me, was profoundly different from my meditation yesterday, where I had not dosed. You can improve interpersonal relationships, also depending on the intention that you're setting, but there's a lot of really compelling research out of the Netherlands where folks with Asperger's and autism are experiencing connection with others for the first time because of psychedelics, saying, like, making eye contact for the first time, saying that they got it all of a sudden, right? They felt like they were just watching social situations, and then after use of psychedelics, click, could connect, could see. what does it say at the bottom? Oh, improve athletic coordination. This one is really interesting. A lot of martial artists use it, and fighters. What are those guys who do that, like professional fighting? Apparently your reflexes become so good and your coordination becomes so good. I didn't really understand this until I started going to yoga classes on my microdosing day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have never held tree pose for so long and been so balanced. I don't know if that's universal and across the board. You can certainly share if you've microdosed how your athletic performance is, but it's certainly something to note here. Not just the mind, the connection from the mind to the body is impacted with a microdose too. Like I said in the beginning, over 200 types of psychedelic mushrooms. The psilocybin, that's the compound in the psychedelic mushroom, that's the medicine. It's more concentrated in the caps than in the stems. Microdosing is meant to be subperceptual. You'll see that term a lot when microdosing is talked about, subperceptual, meaning that you're not supposed to feel anything really big and crazy. There are doses, and I'll talk about the dose sizes in a minute, but in my experience, just being perceptual is the right dose. That start low and increase theory there, so that you just start to notice like, oh, something feels like a little bit more sparkly. The color of that orange when I opened it up was just a little bit brighter. The calmness of my body when my husband was triggered was different than how it is on other days. You just start to subtly notice shifts. That's the point of it. The microdose is for the subtle long game. You can still perform daily activities while microdosing, although I highly encourage you, if you've never used any psychedelics before, to choose a day when you don't have any vehicles to operate, or you're not responsible for somebody's tiny little life, that be your first microdosing day, or maybe your first few days, where you've got a little bit of space to just notice and reflect and feel the feeling of it in your system. Everybody always wants to know, how do you do it? How do you make it? How do you do it? You can find this information online. I bought the Third Wave. That's a really good resource. If you've not been on their website, Third Wave has a microdosing course, and they, have some videos and walk you through exactly how to do it, but it's really very simple. You take your psychedelic mushrooms, your Psilocybin cubensis, and you grind them into an even powder. You can do this with a small coffee grinder, a clean coffee grinder, one that you will not then grind coffee with to serve to your in-laws, perhaps. This will be a separate microdosing coffee grinder. You can use one of those little magic bullet blenders, but generally it needs to be a smaller blender because the mushrooms break down really quickly and grind into a very fine powder. You wouldn't put it into a giant Vitamix necessarily. I don't know if you'd be able to get, unless you were doing a very large volume of mushrooms, but a small grinder for you will work best. It does look like I can see the chat box. Let me just check. Great. Nikki, thank you. Mixed martial arts. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, LSD or mushroom. We're only talking about mushrooms tonight, although LSD was noted on one of the slides there from a picture that I snagged from someone. Nikki just eats them whole. Yeah, Nikki, that is one of the ways that you can microdose. Certainly break a piece off of the mushroom. The reason that you want to grind is so that there's an even distribution of the psilocybin in your capsule. So remember, there's more in the caps than in the stems. And if you want to do this as accurately as possible, and I would encourage you to want to do this as intentionally as possible, let's say, I suggest grinding. You can then put it into capsules, or you can just scoop the powder and weigh it. I meant to grab my little scale. You need a little microgram scale. They're about $30 on Amazon if you're gonna seriously pursue this. And you wanna weigh your capsule or weigh your dose so that you know where you're starting and how you're increasing. So 0.01 would be the teeny tiniest, littlest dose of mushrooms. I don't know there would be much of a perception of anything shifting on that dose, but don't forget, you don't have to feel it to have those network connections start to happen. So some people who I support with microdosing might say, like, I really didn't feel anything for like the first week. But then all of a sudden in the second week, I don't know why, but it was easier for me to say no to the drink that I didn't want, the alcohol. Right? I didn't really feel anything when I took the microdose. Remember, subperceptual, but I suddenly was able to start dropping my kids off at my mother-in-law's without being so irritated with her. Do you get where I'm going with this? It's subtle. And I'll show you how to harness that subtlety to be really powerful. So 0.01 is tiny, and 0.5, a half a gram, that's a pretty big microdose in my opinion. So for comparison's sake, if you were to do a trip dose or have a journey, or if you've ever eaten a bunch of mushrooms and had a full-on 6-hour psychedelic experience, you ate anywhere from 3 to 5 grams, let's say. Maybe even 2 grams could put you there, depending on your weight and your tolerance. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5 grams is a full journey. I'm talking about starting down at about 0.2, 0.25, a quarter of a gram. You do want to skip days between doses, and I will show you that in a future slide to avoid building tolerance. You can build up a tolerance to psychedelics. Mushrooms and LSD work along the same pathways. If you're using one and you switch to the other, you've still got a tolerance to both of them, right? They're considered the same when we're talking about building a tolerance. So you do need to wait at least 2 days in between, although there is one dosing schedule that I'll explain that has you chunk 3 days together. But you don't want to do it every day, guys. This isn't like popping a Xanax or popping a vitamin that, your B vitamin that gives you some energy and you don't want to miss a day. The whole point of this is to be aware of the contrast. You want to dose and notice, and then you want to have the experience of not having a dose in your system and notice that too. All of life is a contrast, right? We want to have that experience with our psychedelics as well, because your ability to notice what's happening, to be a curious observer to this process, to this little beautiful experiment you're putting yourself through, that's what's going to take you the distance and get you to your intention that you've set for yourself with your microdosing. You want to take your microdose intentionally. This is not I'm just having a crazy morning and I got my coffee and I got my this and I'm just going to throw back my microdose and slug it down with my coffee and then just go about my crazy day as if I didn't take anything at all. You want to take a moment, connect with the medicine, connect with the plant. If you meditate, if you take 3 deep breaths, if you pray, if you have anything intentional about your morning practice, and I would highly encourage you, if you're here because you want to change any aspect of your life, that having an intentional morning practice, even 5 minutes, is going to get you there and support you in getting you there. That's when you want to take your microdose. It can be very stimulating. So this is not a nighttime supplement. This is a daytime supplement. The effects will be felt if you feel something, if it's not totally subperceptual, 6 to 8 hours, and it will carry over a bit into the next day. You want to create a little bit of space on your microdosing days. I'm not telling you have to go on a retreat. People tend to panic that they'll save all their microdoses and hoard them. And they're like, I haven't had the perfect day yet to start. That's not what this is about. You want to experience this in the context of your real life. Yes. And you want to take a little bit of space, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to explore some meditation, definitely some movement. Take one of your meals and allow it to be pleasurable. Enjoy it. Prioritize sleep on a microdosing day. You may find that those new connections that were made will be a little bit stickier once you've gotten a good night's sleep. And some people find that at the end of the microdosing day, they might be a tad bit more tired. I do find that it's initially stimulating for me, and then I get pretty subdued. But everybody is different. It's a great day to get out in nature, beautiful day to go for a walk, leave your phone back at your desk or back at the house and just get yourself in nature. This certainly goes for larger doses as well, much more, I would say. I would not suggest anybody do a journey indoors. There's something very profound and beautiful about connecting with nature and psychedelics. They're BFFs there. And make it a day where you connect. My husband and I are on the same microdosing schedule. We try to be, not always. I should have put it on the list. I mean, it's a great day to have an orgasm, right? To experience pleasure with a partner or by yourself. It's a good day for creative work. It's a good day for that project that you maybe just keep thinking like, that thing I'm writing, I'm just sort of stuck on it. That's the day when you want to open the document and see where the microdose takes you. You want to observe. You want to record. You are going to get so much out of the experience if you observe, record, and reflect. Really, some people think this is nuts. They're like, okay, I observed, like, wow, I felt less stressed today. There, I did it, I observed. If there's a way for you to write it in your phone notes, write it in your planner, just on that day, you could just 5 words, right? Felt light and sparkly today, right? Anything. But that observation is what's tethering you back to your intention. I'll teach you how to set an intention with the medicine in a minute. This is really the game-changing part for people who see a lot of benefit in the microdosing experience, and those who are like, yeah, it was fun, it was cool, like I enjoyed it, but I don't see the need to continue. All right, what's an intention, right? Why do I have to set an intention? An intention is a conscious aim tied to an embodied action in the future. I heard this definition recently and I was like, I have to write this down immediately. A conscious aim, something you are intentionally aiming for, tied to an action in the future. So what do you want? What's your intention? When you bring intention to any aspect of your life, you are going to see improvements in it. So many of us, I mean, I was taught this way, just kind of walk through life, allowing what's happening around us to dictate how we feel. When you understand that you have the power to be intentional, to set an intention, our thoughts are powerful. Our thoughts create our reality. That's what we're talking about tonight. Changing our thought patterns to change our reality. Look, whether you microdose or not, explore getting intentional, right? Work with the medicine to set a conscious aim tied to an embodied action in a future. Examples of intentions. What's an example of an intention? Well, the broadest intention, when somebody says to me, I don't know what intention to set when I'm holding my mushroom capsule. I have no idea what to say. A very broad, very simple, very open intention could be something as basic as show me the way. Connect me to myself. Help support me in staying grounded today. It's a little more specific. Improve my relationships. It's not a wish, although it kind of feels like a wish. It's a very specific ask. How do you set an intention? Think about, what habit would you like to cultivate? If you're brave, answer one of these questions in the chat box. Anybody, what habit would you like to cultivate? It could be something as simple as journaling every day. Your intention could be support me in being introspective, support me in carving out the time to journal every day. How would you like to show up in your communication with others? I mean, there isn't any one of us who couldn't improve our interpersonal relationships. I know I certainly could. And how much better is life when we're not having relationship angst, right? People stuff can be really complicated. What would you like to get better at? What does your ideal self do in a day? Envision what you'd like your day to look like. That might support you in setting intentions. What would you like to stop doing? So how do I dose? People are asking, how do I do it? I think this was taken from Third Wave. I did not give them credit, but this is their classic dosing schedule. This is the one set forth by James Fadiman. He wrote the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. Great book if you're interested. And this is the dosing schedule that he really experimented with, and many, many people have used over the last decade or so since his book was published, and say, this is kind of the gold standard, or this is where I like to support people to start here. So day one, let's say that's tomorrow, Friday. Let's say you had some psychedelic mushrooms and it was your dose day. You'd set your intention, you'd take your dose, and you'd allow yourself a little bit of space throughout the day to notice, observe, and reflect. That's day one. Then that would be Friday, let's say. Then Saturday is day two. It's not a dose day, but some people say it's better than the dose day. This is arguable. Some people are like, I don't feel any different on day two. I love day two. Dose day, and I'll talk about how it feels. Dose day tends to be, there's a bit of ahas for me. I might feel a little different. I might see something that I've connected the dot on, and it's making me feel a little bit like, oh, wow, like I've been doing that, right? There's some stuff that might be stirred up on day one in the dose. And on day two, it's like the dust settles and that's an integration day. If you've ever done a larger dose of mushrooms, you know the day after, even if you're exhausted from staying up all night, there's something really beautiful and magical about the day after, and even the few days after a larger dose. Those are the integration days. Those are the days when what you saw and what you experienced and what you felt kind of all, I don't know, land gently in front of you, and you have some capacity to deal with them or look at them, or maybe they're just not a big deal at all, because on day one you had a good cry about it, and day two you're feeling like, I'm so much lighter after that. That's day two. You definitely want to notice the after effects, as Third Wave says. And then day three, that's a no dose day. That's a contrast day. That's a what's it like to be in my life without this medicine in my system day. And you want to notice those effects as well. And then on day four, you dose again. So put quite simply, you're putting 2 days in between your doses. So where Nikki says she doses twice a week, that's about what this dosing schedule gives you. But if you want to be really consistent with it, you don't just dose every Monday and Thursday. You dose, skip, dose, skip, dose, whatever days they fall on. You got to be pretty good about your calendar. You can tinker with your dosing schedule though. How many weeks? Yeah, good question. I suggest that people try microdosing for 3 months. Because it's so subtle, it can take a little bit of time to start noticing for some, although I will say by the second and third week is when people start to go like, oh, I'm starting to get what's happening here. And then others will say on the first time they dose, they were like, oh yeah, I get it. And then still others second or third month before they start to see and feel the changes. So 3 months is generally a really good amount of time for any change, really a quarter. And in coaching school, I learned this too. Behavior change does not happen in a couple weeks. Even the 21-day thing that we all learn, it's really about 3 months of intentional effort to burn new neural pathways and to truly experience lasting change. So this is the classic dosing schedule. And the other one I don't have a slide for is 4 days on and 3 days off. That's the Stamets schedule. You can Google that. It's called the Stamets stack too, because he stacks niacin and lion's mane with your microdose, and you take them all at the same time, like I said, to increase that neurogenesis with the lion's mane. And I believe the niacin is vitamin B3. That's the one that can give you the flush where you like feel like you're in a sauna, but you're not. I think that delivers the medicine faster. Somebody with a anatomy and physiology may understand that better. How does it feel? It can be stimulating, but it can also be relaxing. The medicine can really talk. I don't know how else to say it. I have some days where I take the medicine and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to lie down. And not because the medicine made me tired, but because the medicine showed me how I had not allowed myself to rest for the last few days. It's revealing. Yeah, so that's stimulating for some in a good way. Creativity stimulating, awareness building. Suddenly that aha moment is there. You can get into a flow state rather easily. You can show up with productivity for your projects and tasks. It can really amplify the senses too. And some people find that irritating, actually. I'm already sensory sensitive. So I do notice on a microdosing day, I am more dependent on my earplugs. Those of you with sensory overload issues, I mean, this is one of my favorite hacks in the world. I know earplugs feel weird for some people. If you can get used to the feeling of them, it is amazing to turn down the volume, especially if you have children. Turn them on, you can still hear everything, but it's just muted just enough so that stimulated feeling can be turned down. That stimulated senses feeling is really good for some people. I mean, talk about delicious food, right? Or the color of your food, or the way you feel when you're out in nature. I find that I just have an easier time being myself. It feels like to me, like it strips away all the parts of me that might start to chatter around like, well, that person said that they wanted this, so let me offer them this. It's just, I'm much more aligned and dropped in to me. What are you taking away from this presentation? What's one thing that you said, heard, felt, or realized that's like, ooh, that's interesting? Or, I think that I want to do blank next. Or I learned blank. I really believe that this medicine needs to be available to so many people. There's so much suffering happening right now in our world, and we have answers to that. We have answers to that. We have microdosing, and we have these plant medicine journeys that Roger leads. And we're both incredibly passionate about getting this medicine out into the world in a way that is accessible. Thank you so much for attending tonight. There was so much learning here. You guys rock. Ciao.